So let me just do a brief introduction. Then I have a series of questions for him, many of which were ones that I think some of you had sent in advance. But then about 30, 40 minutes in, I'll also open it up for Q&A from you or anything you might want to talk to him about. So just a brief bio. So Jerry has been CEO of Citadel since 2008. He's responsible for the firm's key operating functions globally. He's also a member of their portfolio committee. And he also served as CFO of Citadel from 2003 until 2021. So he joined Citadel in 1993 while completing his college degree and was among the very first employees for Citadel. Jerry did his undergrad in commerce, majoring in accounting and finance from DePaul, and did his MBA at the GSB, now Booth. He's a registered CPA in the state of Illinois and has served on many, many industry committees, boards, and other things. He's chair of the board of trustees for DePaul University. He's also very active in various civic organizations. He's vice chair of the board of directors for the Big Shoulders Fund and a trustee for Marist High School. So thank you very much, Jerry, for joining us today.
Sure.
So let me just start with just your background. I think like many of the students in attendance today, you came to the GSB as a part-time student. So if you could just say a little bit about your background and what led you to come to the GSB.
So I had a bit of a flashback this morning pulling to that parking lot at 201 East Illinois, because on Saturdays, I definitely was coming in here at about 90 miles an hour with 3 minutes before class started. So my hat's off to you. Obviously, the commitment to be here on a Saturday, the commitment to being a part-time student really is quite an undertaking. And while it's been 25 years since I graduated from here, I definitely remember the balancing act of trying to really have a career and to go to school at night, and bluntly also to have some semblance of social interaction around that point. And I met my wife about 3 days before I started here, and there was distinctly in the first class a reference made that if you were not already dating someone or engaged to be married, et cetera, you should assume that that won't happen during that time. I met my wife, we dated, and I actually got married along the way. So I look back now through the lens of time, and it's amazing you can actually cram that much activity into a 24-hour day. But thank you for the invitation to be here. I really appreciate that. My time at Booth really came down to a simple assessment for me, which was I was in year 3 of my career at Citadel. I had started as an intern, as you said, and I had gone through, I think we're going to talk a little bit about my early years, but I was, 2 years into my full-time career at Citadel, and the firm was, pretty frenetic in terms of, the pace of growth, but it still at the end of the day was a reasonably small firm, a few $100 million in capital, a few dozen employees. And there was a want to be able to learn more about obviously what the world was like away from Citadel. And so for me, the opportunity cost of quitting and going back to school full time just was not going to happen. So I ultimately decided I was going to pursue, the part-time program. Obviously the Booth program had an exceptional reputation in Chicago, across the United States, internationally. And so from my standpoint, it really was the benefit of having in my backyard the ability to go be one of the premier MBA programs and to do it here. So it was, and the chance to be surrounded by like-minded people who obviously were sharing that experience of working, going to school, and obviously trying to balance all those pieces at the same time.
So you mentioned that you began at Citadel when it was just 3 years old. Could you speak about sort of starting at Citadel and the journey you've had?
So I started Citadel as an intern. I went to DePaul University, the other side of the city, for undergrad, and I had, basically went to school full time and worked full time, through the bulk of my undergrad years. And so I worked at a public accounting firm sophomore to junior year, and I thought, I was going to do this I knew I wanted to move into accounting, but I was doing accounting and finance undergrad, and I thought this is an opportunity for how do I think about, exploring what the world of finance may be like away from that. And there was a job posting at DePaul's Career Center for a firm called Wellington Financial Group. And Wellington was the predecessor name for Citadel. So I went into Citadel in March '93, and I was, one of 18 employees, $100 million in capital under management, a very different firm, probably would have been, in maybe a third of this room, if that. And, but was, a bit like a dot-com in finance at that point in terms of, a really focused effort to build something. You would never know that Citadel was going to grow into, the two firms we built in terms of, Citadel, a $60 billion asset manager, and Citadel Securities. But one thing was clear to me was there definitely was an aspiration to grow in a very different way and to build something very different. I went through, worked for a year as an intern. At the end of that year, Ken Griffin called me in and had said to me, would you think about staying here full time? And I said, no, I'm going to go work in public accounting. I've already accepted another job. And he put the pitch that, Citadel was truly building something different. And it's probably the greatest understatement in the history of finance. The funny part of this was I was going to work at Deloitte & Touche, and the professor of who ran the honors program at DePaul was the Deloitte & Touche endowed professor. And I had to go in to tell him I was reneging my acceptance at Deloitte to stay at Citadel. And he has some very choice words of expletives of what he thought about that decision. But I mean, look, through the lens of time, you would never have thought that Citadel would grow in the way that it did. And my career really was a result of putting my hand up for a lot of different opportunities along the way. I became the controller of the firm when I was 25. We had $700 million in capital under management. And it was because I went into Ken's office when our controller moved to the East Coast, and I pounded the table of, I can do that job. A lot of my career was built over the years on that kind of hand up at an opportune moment of time when there was a change in our business, when there was a disruption in a part of the enterprise I thought that I could, that I'd be able to run with. And Ken gave me a lot of opportunities to prove myself in that way. And so I did, I was in school at Booth. A year into that, I became the controller of the firm. That was really the last 2 years of being at Booth. Graduated from here in '99. And then 2 years later, when the CFO role of the firm opened up, it was the opportunity to really I was the inside-facing person of the firm. I dealt with investors. I ran the internal accounting, tax, internal controls, infrastructure of the firm. The CFO was the external face of the firm, and so we'll swap these, and you'll be the CFO, and we'll hire a treasurer to be that external face. And I said, no, I'm going to be the CFO, and we're going to do the whole thing under one roof. And he gave me, again, it was the opportunity to prove myself in a very different dimension of risk-taking, that I could position to be the external face of the firm in that way, rating agencies, investors, counterparties, the whole external footprint of what we did. And then that was CFO of the firm when I was about 30. And then 6 years later, I basically built over that 6 years the COO role of the firm. So you're taking over our human capital footprint, what we do from an investor standpoint, our operational backbone. Really, everything is supported the non-investment side of the operations, X technology, as part of the remit I have at Citadel. And I've been fortunate, in 31 years, I've run businesses, I've helped, shut businesses down. I've been pretty much involved in every major commercial endeavor we've had, but it's been because Citadel is a place where it really promotes that, active risk-taking, not just as a firm, but risk-taking in people to extend yourself in a very different direction than perhaps what you may have thought was possible earlier in your career.
So given that you did your undergrad at DePaul, then came to Booth, and you were working at the same time while you were at Booth. So how did the Booth experience play out for you then, and how has that helped you sort of through your career at Citadel?
Well, the great thing about Booth, all right, so obviously by reputation, we can talk about Booth versus Northwestern in terms of obviously hardcore finance school, maybe some fluffier skills down the street. But I'll call it a little differently. I was a 24-year-old when I started at Booth, and maybe on the earlier side of what some people were in the part-time program, but I also worked in a firm that was run by 20-year-olds. So I'd love to tell you we were long on all sorts of management expertise, but we weren't. We largely, you were growing by, learning, seeking out the right relationships, the right people to talk to, by us, a bit by the interactions you had with the outside world. And I thought, in terms of if I'm going to be in this part of the business, and I knew very clearly early on that was where I wanted to kind of focus my time. I didn't have an interest to go work in the in the trading side of what we did. I thought that ultimately being part of the operational and finance backbone of the firm is where I wanted to be. And you could see great careers that were launched in the back of that across Wall Street. But to do that, I needed a different set of skills. I needed to learn about what is the management 101? What is in terms of thinking about a broader set of things away from just pure play accounting and finance concepts, which clearly were a big piece of what I did here at Booth, but it also was the opportunity to be in classrooms like this, and you were sitting next to someone, at the time when First Chicago was obviously the First Chicago Scholars Program that brought dozens of students into the part-time program every year. But you had the benefit of being with people who were working in very different industries, ranging from whether they were working at in healthcare to banking to obviously people who worked in trading firms. You had a panoply of different experiences that were brought to bear in terms of that you could learn from and the lessons that came with that. And you were at school with people who were not just in their mid-20s, but perhaps in their 30s, maybe in their late 30s, early 40s, look, there's a benefit of, and I can say this now as being a 50-year-old, that there's a benefit of experience that you can help in terms of relaying to others. And I really wanted to be part of being able to soak that in because it helped me be better at what I did then and how I would grow over the course of time.
And are there particular faculty that you still remember from your time at Booth?
Well, it's funny, it's before we walked in here and someone had said, Randy Krosner's name. And we had the benefit of having Randy Krosner's money banking class, which was obviously renowned at that point in time. But I also had the benefit of when Austin Goolsbee, I think was in year 2 here, was my first year. And so I think he had a class that was more of a merger, like an M&A type class that was the benefit of being able to take both of those. And they definitely, and I still am in contact with Randy today.
Mm-hmm. So maybe let me take you to Citadel again and the growth that you've had. What do you think has been the key to its success, right? It's lasted a long time. It's considered widely the best run, best performing hedge fund probably of all time. What do you think has contributed to that success?
There's been really, I think, 4 factors, and I probably could say 10, but I'll say 4 factors I think have been really important keys to the success of Citadel and our businesses over time. First and foremost, it's a commitment to meritocracy. And we spend an inordinate amount of time as a senior leadership of the firm interviewing people. Like I probably lost count of the number of people that I've met with over the course of my career. And I think for Ken has made some comment that he's met with like 10,000 people over time or something like that. But I interview people every week across all different parts of our business. And it's toward being able to think about what is, and in firms like ours, like I would say, we're not Coca-Cola. We don't have some secret formula. It's ultimately the people that come together in all the different aspects of our business, whether it be working in engineering, those that work in terms of our, of our support functions, those that work in terms of the front office of the business. That ultimately, a key piece is ultimately promoting an environment where you're seeking to bring together the absolute best and brightest in every field. And we're not embarrassed to say that. I think ultimately that's been a persistent hallmark of our firm over time. And really what you say is to continue to amp up the commitment to that, over the course of the years has been a very key part of our ability to have the persistence of performance that we've had. And I think as you highlight, we were recognized last year as being the #1 firm of all time in terms of gross net returns delivered to investors. And we just extended our lead this year. In 33 years of the history of Citadel, we delivered $74 billion of returns to our external clients over time. And so that, the persistence of success is not a firm that was just built in the 90s or in the 2000s. This is a firm that in the last 4 years has had 3 of our probably 3 best years in terms of through COVID, 3 of our best returning years. So it's first and foremost that commitment to meritocracy. Second, in terms of we're really performance focused. So it's where are the aspects of what we do, but what matters. So what are the aspects across every part of the business? Strong orientation toward goals, strong orientation, not just in terms of our short-term goals, but what do we need to think about for 18, 24 months? You really can't go out, maybe able to go out to the 3rd year in terms of thinking about it, but to really say you can do a 10-year forecast in this business, I think is just a bit misleading. So it's again, then you're focused in that direction. Then, along with that is a very clear focus in terms of innovation across the business. And it's not in terms of, I tell you that we've done everything has been internally developed over time. Sometimes we're fast followers. So you see something's being done in the marketplace by a competitor. How do you think about adapting that in a way that's, that's real to your business and be able to extend that in a way that perhaps they haven't thought about and be able to use as a part of your competitive advantage. And then finally, it's the execution skills, because in a business like ours, it's great to have ideas, but if you can't ultimately be able to get those monetized into something that promotes commercial success, they're really useless. And so the combination of those pieces, but particularly in execution, has been a key part of what we've done. And I think one of the things that being in a program like this, you get the benefit of hearing other people's stories over time. And I can tell you that in we had a portfolio acquisition that we did along the way, and this is a number of years ago, but we were in a firm in Boston on a Sunday to bid on what was a $15 to $20 billion portfolio, and literally this had to be resolved before the open the next day. And so I arrived in Boston at like 6 o'clock at night with a team of people, and one of the large banks was there at the same time, and they were going to price a portfolio of the assets that were there as well. And at 10:30, 11 o'clock, as the conversations are going back and forth, the team, the other institution said, well, we're going to wrap this up and go home for the night. And they called and said, we'll pick this up in the morning. And we told them, well, there won't be a portfolio here in the morning because we're gonna get this done tonight. And we worked through the entire night and basically purchased that portfolio before the open. And there's a lot of different stories I could tell you over time where that difference in terms of the commitment to execution is what the difference is between getting something done and getting something done materially that, that's commercially successful.
Now, some people, I think, know about Citadel, and then you also have Citadel Securities, which is a key global market maker. I mean, what was the rationale behind starting it, and how do they two sort of intertwine or are different in terms of the way they're run?
So no intertwining between the two. They're two separate businesses. So Citadel, $60 billion hedge fund that runs capital on behalf of institutional investors around the world. And I see one of my colleagues wearing a Citadel Securities jacket today. And Citadel Securities, which is the leading market maker in the world. And when you look at in terms of what's been built, the question becomes like, well, how did it launch? About 22 years ago, when the options markets in Chicago and largely these various exchanges were moving to be electronic, that became our entry point into Citadel Securities. The first business that was built was options market making. And part of it was like, what was the fundamental premise that Citadel was built on? Citadel was built on the premise that you could have the intersection of technology and finance to be able to, to invest in a very different way. And part of that success becomes you're able to bring together technology, engineering with asset pricing acumen at a point in time that you were seeing kind of a revolution taking place in, in the options markets. And we became, and still are today, the dominant options market maker in the United States. We turn over in a given day, up to a third plus of the options turnover goes through Citadel Securities in the US in a given day. That extended next into equity market making. And so if you look at, when we launched that business and what it is today, we are the largest hub for retail order flow in the United States. And we turn over in a given day something like 40% of the turnover in equities is done through Citadel in the retail equities, and about a quarter of the turnover in US equity markets goes through Citadel in a given day. Now that's become a global business as well. We trade in 35 different countries. A million different instruments get traded. We put billions of quotes into the marketplace every day. And so that's a very different business than Citadel, which is very much, obviously has the same, tenets in terms of thinking about technology enabling investments, but it's a much more fundamental investment business. So our business in the hedge fund is, if you look at our equities business, it's sector focused, it's market neutral. And in that sector focus, you have someone who has a core discipline. I'm a financials investor. There's 40 stocks I follow. I have a view on the earnings. I have a call that I make long or short on the stock, and I'm committing capital behind that. There's a thesis. There's a catalyst for action. I'm exiting the transaction. And so a lot of our business is, in there, whether it be in equities, fixed income and macro, commodities, credit and convertibles, or quantitative strategies. They're predominantly fundamentally based investment businesses, whereas what we do in securities is much more about asset pricing in the moment in response to your client activity. And so in two very different businesses, same fundamental principles of the things we talked about in terms of having, focus on meritocracy, hire the best and brightest, bring together in terms of a commitment to excellence and performance, what we do in terms of innovation, what we do in execution. Those are four tenets that are present across both of those businesses, but the ways in which they make money are very, different from one another.
Do they share a technology backbone, or are those completely separate?
Different. Everything we do from from a pure play trading perspective, there's different engineering teams, different leadership atop those businesses. We have some points of connectivity in terms of back office systems, as you expect. I mean, if you can clear a trade for for the market making business, you can extend that technology for our hedge fund business. But otherwise, the businesses are very separate and distinct from one another.
So one of the questions that came in was about the impact of technology on your business, but in some ways, technology is your business, right? Or maybe you could just think about that.
Our one of our chief technology officers along the way used to have a saying. It was, "We're a technology firm that trades." But I think if you look at technology, does enable a lot of the experiences. So if I look at just for sake of the argument for a minute, if I look at our investment teams again, I'll use our equities business again for a minute. If I'm a portfolio manager and you just think about the volume of information in this age that comes into your inbox in a given day, you've got company earnings, you've got reports from the banks, you've got all the different points of news that come in through the course of a day. So we have dedicated teams of engineers that support every investment business at Citadel. There's specific engineers for the equities business, for commodities, for credit, et cetera. And so we have teams that are focused on the trading experience, So I'll call investment in terms of thinking about like how should we catalyze the theme for my portfolio as being investment, and trading becomes how I get that idea monetized. But you're gonna have the tools that are based there for investment. There's tools that are there for thinking about how the portfolios are financed in terms of the teams that I run. There's teams that are focused, and that's balance sheet, both long and short side of what you do from a position standpoint. There's the trading process, how we think about data and the processing of data throughout the firm. So our hedge fund business has about 800 engineers. So 3,000 people that work in the hedge funds, roughly about third plus of our headcount comes from from engineering. And then the securities business, about 1,500 people. It's a similar order of magnitude in terms of, I think, 700 engineers who are part of then. And that's a business where you're very much focused, not just in terms of the technology that enables the predictive analytics that are used in terms of thinking about the instantaneous pricing of assets that needs to be done on a global basis, but also in terms of all the points of, and we're connected to every major exchange around the world. And so, and that ranges from equities to options to interest rate derivatives to treasuries. There's very different points of connectivity that are done through each of those. So from technology, something that's been core backbone of the firm, a core tenet of how we've operated the place since day one, but it's very much embedded in terms of what we do today.
Let me take you back to a question that one of the points you mentioned about recruiting and the amount of time you spend interviewing. What is it that you look for in somebody you think will come and be successful at Citadel?
So I mean, one of the things you probably take for granted in this room is you are surrounded by some of the best and brightest people are representing this room and in the school. And that's clearly the case of what we see as well. In terms of the absolute best and brightest are saying, resumes to us. In fact, for our internship program last year, and we've actually increased it this year, we had 300 spots for internships. This, called summer of 23, we had 75,000 resumes that we received. I've heard the number is something like 100,000 this year, similar order of magnitude in terms of number of seats. So it just gives you some idea of the competitiveness of the programs and selection process for the people we're bringing together for our business. But what are the things that really distinguish people I think that we hire? Clearly, first, you're bright, accomplished, but what are the types of things? They're going to be people who they've gone the extra mile in terms of when you look at their resume. They're, if they're an undergrad, they've been involved, heavily in terms of they've probably done research in terms of looking for a particular professor that they're interested in. They've looked to be able to do research there. They're involved in in a team sport. They've been involved in broader activities across the campus that are helping to further the area of study in which that they're really focused on. And then look bluntly, when you're talking to people who are sitting in a program like this, first and foremost, what do you know they have? Grit. So they've got grit, a strong work ethic. I mean, look, you're in school on a Saturday. You have grit, you have work ethic in terms of thinking about the commitment you're willing to make to invest in yourselves to be able to drive your career to the next level. And that's the type of people we're really focused on. I've made that distinguishing type of commitment, to further their careers. And bluntly, there's, looking across the world, there is differentiation between those groups of those that are willing to take the extra step to be able to grow their careers in that direction. But I think ultimately in terms of, you've got people who they've been risk takers in some way in their own kind of career, the things they've looked to be able to, to accomplish, and they're willing to go the extra mile in terms of ultimately that, piece of furthering their skill sets at the same time.
And how do you think about bringing people in the way you did as an intern and then developing them in Citadel, or bringing people in at sort of higher levels from outside?
That's a great question, because they're not mutually exclusive. We do a lot of both. And there's some people like, I've built a 30-year career at Citadel, having started as an intern, and there's a number of people in our leadership team who started. And Peng Zhao, who runs the securities business, he's the CEO of Securities. He started as a PhD from Berkeley with a short stop at Lehman. He's now the CEO for the largest market maker in the world. So we have a firm that was founded by someone who actually started this from their dorm room at Harvard. So that kind of culture of people who've been, it's find undergrads, young graduate hires, and you provide an environment for them to really focus. If you are serious about your career, I fundamentally believe this. There's not a better place than Citadel or Citadel Securities for you to be if you're really serious about taking that extra step in your career. But I think along with that, I'd love to tell you we corner the market on every great person that comes out of undergrad or grad school. That's just not the case. And sometimes you're going to have someone who's gone, they have much the way I had a view of where I wanted my career to develop. Someone said, like, look, I want to go work at Goldman Sachs for 2 years, or I want to go work at JP Morgan. or I want to go work in, Amazon or Apple for, the next number of years. They build great careers too. And you want to make sure you're in a position that when they make the decision that they want to take the next step, that you're building the right conversations with them as well. So we have, I'd say, a really good mix from the, in our equities business, about 50% of the portfolio managers we have been internally developed at Citadel. They were the associate who became the analyst, who became perhaps, associate PM into a PM. So that's obviously one talent vertical has been extraordinarily successful for us over time. And the second is that you are able to identify through having the right kind of business development, talent, management functions. And we have, in the hedge fund, something like 65, 70 people who are focused solely on recruiting. So there's experts in the same way we have experts in fixed income and G10, G10 interest rates, foreign exchange. There are experts in our firm who focus solely on what are the 100 firms that matter in fixed income investing? How do we know who the best PMs are at those firms? Who are the best analysts? Who are the up and comers? Who we need to keep in front of? Because you never know when there's going to be an inflection point in their career where that's your moment to get in and recruit them to Citadel. And we do the same thing across commodities, equities, and the like. So it's really, how do you think about having a very thorough understanding of the talent available in the world away from us? We spend an exceptional amount of effort, both in people and in technology, understanding what those vectors for talent look like. So we're in a position to bring them into Citadel, when the moment's right.
Maybe could you say a little bit about sort of how global is Citadel? I know that you have offices around the world. I mean, are they all run similarly? How do you think about that?
Well, I think we're about 19 offices, I think, between the two businesses around the world. So the U.S. largely centered in kind of every major. I call it our original thesis for kind of opening offices was where are the major vectors of talent in financial markets. So clearly, in terms of started here in Chicago when the firm was founded, now headquartered in Miami, but New York, London, Hong Kong, and then today we have offices in Tokyo, Sydney, Singapore, across Europe, in Dublin, Zurich, Paris. So the firm has grown in terms of having offices in opportunities to be able to find an envelope of talent that you're able to successfully build an office around. What we don't do is you're not going to have an office with two people and call that an office. It's how do you actually establish a culture, an ecosystem that's representative of the way in which we actually operate the firm globally. So yes, I do think we try and have a consistent experience for our employees in terms of kind of those key commitments to the culture of the firm, the focused effort in terms of rebuilding for both firms, whether it be the best investment firm in the world or the leading market maker. How do we actually permeate that as a culture and ethos throughout what we do?
You mentioned about the headquarters being in Miami. Could you just speak a little bit about the decision to move and sort of what do you think the city and the state here should do to keep more companies?
All right, this is a bit of a heartbreaking topic for me to talk about. If you get me revved up on this, I could go a while. But so just for 30 seconds of my background, I grew up in Chicago. My dad was a Chicago police officer. I grew up in the southwest side of the city. I went to DePaul. I am Chicago. I had the good fortune of help. You think about all the different places you can go and work in life. I had the option or the opportunity to meet Ken Griffin at a very early age and to build two of the leading brands in finance in my hometown. So in terms of thinking about the benefits of that, in terms of having been able to do that around your friends and family was a once in a lifetime experience. I wish it was me for my entire lifetime. But the reality is, in terms of, it gets back to the recruiting aspect. And it used to be said, if I think about some of the earlier days of the firm, and, we went to New York second. We weren't a New York firm, became a Chicago firm. We were a Chicago firm that then went to New York. And it used to be said that the hardest trade was to get someone to leave New York and get them to come to Chicago. Second hardest trade was moving back. Because why? The experience of you live in New York versus you come and live in Lincoln Park, or you live in kind of surrounding community here in the Gold Coast and Streeterville, or in the suburbs here, you could build an exceptional life for your family being based in Chicago. In terms of the access to schools, access to transportation, all the different parts. I think it was a key part of the sales pitch when we were sitting across from employees and their spouses or the partners in terms of ultimately being able to recruit them to the firm. So then so we built an office in New York over time. We built offices in London, but that just became part of obviously a global footprint. But we still had north of in June 22 with 1,100 people here based in Chicago. What was the catalyst? Open the front page. I guess go on chicagotribune.com because you say to open the front page of the paper. There is a defined public safety issue in the city of Chicago that, you're saying government leaders come in for these series. I'd love to sit in the front row for one of those conversations because there's been a defined lack of leadership by government officials to address this problem. And fundamentally, you cannot recruit people to Chicago for our business in the same way we had done in the 30 years prior. And it was a gut-wrenching decision to make in terms of moving, the firm to Miami. But I think everything you know about this in terms of when people can debate which city's safer, which city's not, all you have to do is look at the headlines over the course of the last week, and the city council's kind of efforts are, we're gonna call for a ceasefire in Gaza in a week when 4 teenagers were shot and killed in front of public schools, public high schools in the city of Chicago. I think it's disgraceful. So from that standpoint, it's ultimately, what are we gonna do? If you take the other side, it's like, we've made our decision and we've reduced our headcount in Chicago pretty significantly on the back of that. And I spend, a good chunk of my week in New York and Miami these days. My youngest son is a sophomore in high school. So we'll have some decision to think about maybe at some point about whether, where home is gonna be. But for the immediate future, dad's on an airplane. But in the meantime, the question becomes, as someone who's, grew up in Chicago and lived here my whole life, is what is the Chicago and what is the state of Illinois we're gonna have behind us? And that's clearly critically important to people in this room. And the vibrancy of, the corporate community that is the kind of lifeblood of the compensations paid and the lives we're able to build in terms of the different communities in which we live. And if we don't get our kind of things together from fundamentally a public safety standpoint, a commitment to deal with the fiscal issues in the state of Illinois and the state of Chicago, we're going to have a markedly different place of how we're able to live and where, the generations before us. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
Thank you. Thank you for your candor. You've grew up in Chicago, as you said, and you've done a lot in terms of giving back and in terms of civic engagement, the things that I mentioned in my introduction. Would you speak a bit about giving back? What motivates you? When did you start that?
So, kind of back a bit to my background. So having grown up in the southwest side of Chicago, I was one of 4. And as I said, my dad was a policeman. And when I was leaving the house for freshman year of high school, my dad said to me, you better get a scholarship if you intend to go to college because there's no money for us to do it with. 14 years old, you're like walking out the door first day of high school, kind of centers you a bit in terms of what the challenge ahead might be. There's, I guess, good parenting from the standpoint of getting kind of the center day one and the challenge ahead. And I had the fortune of, I did get a 4-year full scholarship to DePaul. That was probably the difference between, there's, some other things I thought about, but that was really the kind of the catalyst of being able to go and to launch, the relationship with DePaul that we've had for 35 years. But it was because someone had made an investment in, it was the accounting alumni organization at DePaul that had funded that scholarship. And it was at the time, a $40,000 scholarship, which was life-changing for a middle-class kid, from the south side of Chicago. And so I made a commitment, and I had to go give a speech in my, my first 3 months I was at DePaul. And this came up, no reason I remember this, my mom mentioned to me not too long ago, and I had to get up and give a speech in front of a couple hundred people that funded the scholarship program and talk about what my commitment was going to be to them. And I said, someday I will be on the other side of that, the dais, and I'm going to make sure that, that I make that investment in someone else. And that's been really fundamentally where most of the philanthropy that my wife and I do is really focused on the access to education, because I do believe it is life-changing. And we can take for granted, you're here in the room at the University of Chicago. Okay, that's in terms of what you're gonna be able to accomplish post your graduation from this institution will be unparalleled relative to a number of your peers. But when you think about the state of education, basically and again, kind of tying it back to Chicago, in public schools where fundamentally the kids are years behind, grades behind where they need to be from reading, writing, and math, in terms of access to a safe school to be able to go to. My original philanthropy started with kind of the repayment of my scholarship at DePaul and kind of funding that vertical. But my wife and I became very involved with Big Shoulders Fund, which really operates through a few dozen well-called Catholic grade schools across the inner city. But the reality is the bulk of the kids that they actually educate are non-Catholic. And they're, largely in terms of Black and brown students that wouldn't have access to safe school to go to, that's focused on their well-being and focused on getting them to the finish line in terms of access to college. And so we've had a very deep relationship with Big Shoulders for a long time. And I promise I won't keep tying back to this, but I mean, again, talking about leadership, one of the great programs that has been, that have been a part of the ability for students to access these schools beyond scholarship support, which there's a number of people devoted to this, was the state of Illinois had this Invest in Kids program that I think something like 12,000 students were taking advantage of to get access to these schools that were performing. And, one, they were in class during COVID, which was a marked difference from where the public schools were. But then also in terms of the accomplishment of them at the grade, at the grade level, and the state just killed this program. It was 12,000 kids in it, and I think a waiting list of like 15,000 kids to try and get these tax credit scholarships, which were funded through, again, people willing to make these scholarship dollars available. And the state just killed this program about 4 months ago. It's like, again, another like lack of leadership type of a piece. But I would say in terms of our focus has been, how do we, to enable educational access? And I think that's been like one big hallmark, but I think if I could pivot this a little differently, there's three things that you don't have right now. Oh God, you have three things that I think are fundamental principles of how I think about involvement from a civic standpoint. Is time, talent, and treasure. And you have no time right now. I mean, you have a little time, okay? But I think I found maybe I found a little time. And on the time piece, it's in terms of finding something that so one of the things I did from a time involvement over, it was involvement in stuff that we did like in the local community, at our kids' schools. There were things I easily could have written a check for that made more money probably than what we made in that fundraiser, but it was important because it set an example for your kids and in the community, and it was a friend and fundraiser. So those time elements. Talent became, what are the specific talents that you have? And I will tell you hand on heart that boards across Chicago are starved for young leadership. And and sometimes that leadership becomes of the moment of, I am, as you mentioned, the chair of the board of trustees at DePaul. I've been a member of the board for 15 years, but I became the chair because I was the vice chair, and 4 years ago, right after I became the vice chair of the board, about 3 months later, our chair died. And I'd love to tell you I have all kinds of time to be between my job and things I'm involved in and our family, that I have lots of time to rub together. And the DePaul job became immediately a search for a new president, working through fiscal issues. We've got the things that come with in this moment, this time, working with a major university. And but I made the time because I thought that this was an area where I could have impact at a moment in time that that my talents were called for it. And then treasure, like, again, look, you are in the University of Chicago, you are in the Booth School. So hopefully, as you look at, kind of the MPV of the careers that you're going to launch over the course of the years to come, you hopefully will have the benefit of comp that you earn. And I would encourage you to think of, what are the things you're passionate about? And it's not just like there has to be some huge check of, the Publishers Clearinghouse style check that you're handing over to a charity. It's ultimately the things you do in regular support of things you care about, maybe seeing the intersection of your time and passion and what you have from a monetary standpoint. But these are things I think are incredibly fulfilling because they actually give you the opportunity to do something that kind of mixes a variety of different skills in a way that it's not your day job, and it's not it's in an area that has an impact in the world. And that's really what I've thought about. The stage I've had at Citadel has been, it's given, it's afforded me the opportunity to have an impact in the broader world. And I'm fortunate to work in a firm, again, where a lot of people within Citadel have had profound impacts on things at the civic level, the national level, the international level. And we really, think it's a commitment based on the success we've had, is to give back in meaningful and significant ways.
Thank you. So let me open it up to audience questions. So who wants to go first? Yeah, good.
Thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights. It's very refreshing to hear that Citadel prioritizes merit in hiring and attracting talent, despite maybe some of the firing that's been happening in Wall Street and hedge funds based on people's stance on human rights and whatnot. Does Citadel have space to tolerate political nepotism or people's stance on certain things that are happening abroad and whatnot? The reason I'm asking that is I'm a Palestinian American, first generation, and there's been a lot of issues around that topic.
It's a great question. I think what in terms of we have, I think, and I'm going to be a bit off right here, I think we have 35 different countries where our employees are from. So in terms of there's all sorts of different backgrounds, beliefs. I think at the end of the day, what comes is that no one kind of cares about that. It's really focused and not saying in terms of the issues themselves are important. There's not in terms of the ultimately people have things they're involved with from outside the firm. It's really focused on, we're focused on like, what can you bring to make our firm better? And that's really where our efforts are focused at.
Thank you.
So I think touching on the concept of meritocracy, but taking it in a different direction, you really need a commitment from everyone in the firm to accountability and feedback. So what's kind of the infrastructure you in place for both coaching, firing, things like that for your teams?
The feedback loop is actually pretty much real time. I'd like to tell you that there's like that. I mean, sometimes you're bombarded with feedback in a good way, but ultimately, in terms of, so let me take a step back for a second. The firm runs through a pretty meaningful goal orientation, goal process. So what are the key commercial objectives that we have as a firm? And we think about them through the lens of key commercial objectives. Where do we have our absolute best people staffed and focused against those commercial objectives? And then as the accountability comes with it, it's literally like just the rigor of the monthly or quarterly, like where are we against, okay, there's this, major project and there's 50 steps against this. The senior leadership of the firm routinely gets the kind of, the red, amber, green in terms of looking at I'm like, seriously, I mean, I see a regular cadence of reports across the firm that then give you the ability of looking at, okay, we're behind in this issue, but then you can see the justification for where that may be the case. Now, sometimes it is, you don't have the right people staffed against it, and it becomes this conversation around, do we need a different set of skills against this project to actually get it to completion? Like whether that be the skills of the people in the team, or that you need to bring in skills from the outside to actually get that done. But a lot of it comes from the operating cadence of the firm, and the accountability model is exceptionally high. But we also, I think what comes with it is it's also it's a culture of the coaching mentorship. So again, kind of back to my earlier point, if you look at the amount of talent development we do, particularly if I look at some of our front office businesses, 50% of our PMs and equities are internally developed. That comes by, you were the analyst working for a portfolio manager, or you were an associate working for an analyst, and that basic coaching and kind of leadership point on the way that helps you move into being in one of those seats over time. In our fixed income and macro business, we have, in the past, one of the largest vectors for talent in fixed income and macro was you went to the major trading desks across the street. Well, now in the back of kind of Dodd-Frank, a lot of those seats are no longer there. So you have to do a lot more internal talent development, particularly in those types of FIC-like businesses. So again, you have people they may start as an analyst, they become an associate PM, they become a PM, they become a senior PM. Again, it's a regular piece of what you do from a coaching and a development standpoint that comes with that as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So by your own admission, it was a very young group of individuals that built Citadel to what it is today. Obviously, the business has changed a lot. You foster a lot of excellence throughout the organization, but as an executive team, what have you guys done to keep the same sort of youthful energy that's sort of built into the enterprise?
I think one of the keys to, and I probably could weave this into my kind of 4 comments earlier, but there's still a very strong entrepreneurial DNA of the firm. So maybe it kind of gets a little bit focused in terms of me saying like culture of innovation, but it's a very strong entrepreneurial DNA that gets developed in the firm. And again, against the backdrop of we're not a star system. So there's not one PM who drives and this has been for decades now. There's not one PM who drives all of our P&L in a particular business. So if I look at in 22, we had a record year in our fixed income business. And I think something like 15 PMs had north of 9-figure performance years that year. So it speaks to kind of dispersion of performance across the different investment teams that we have. So with that, if I'm hiring you and you're coming into the firm to be a trader in our gas desk in the commodities business, you're building kind of a mini franchise of your own. So here's, I think it's the best. It gets back to a bit of the recruiting pitch for if you're a PM and I'm sitting across you, why do you come to Citadel? So if I look at one of our competitors, some of our competitors, they'll call PM, someone who in gross terms may run $500 to $750 million in gross market value. That in many firms is called as a portfolio manager. For us, that's often an analyst who's part of a broader team. So if you're a portfolio manager, I'm recruiting you to Citadel, what is my recruiting pitch to you? It's that you can come and build a business that will give you the broader breadth and depth and NPV of your career than you will anywhere else. And why is that the case? We're gonna hire you as a PM. We're gonna have a business development team to be focused to help you hire the 3 to 4 associates and the 2 to 3 analysts, and these numbers can go up or down 1 or 2. But we're gonna help you basically create the idea funnel that comes into your portfolio and the research funnel that comes into your portfolio. Then we're gonna have the benefit of 25 years plus of quantitative research in terms of thinking about monetization of ideas, that's gonna be part of your investment process. We're gonna have a team that focuses on the financing of your portfolio, both commitment of capital on the long side, but we do on the short side in terms of borrowers from from banks or the like, but you're gonna have the stability of your balance sheet. Someone's gonna be focused on that as their full-time job. Another person's gonna be focused solely on trading. You're gonna say, I have this idea, I want to execute X number of shares. There's someone whose sole job is, what is the optimal path for me to get this order into the marketplace with the the least amount of slippage? There's gonna be someone else who's gonna be focused in terms of thinking about, post that, how does this set of trades actually get cleared, processed, and accounted for? So what does it help you to do? You're a pure play investor. You have all the benefits of the infrastructure of running your own hedge fund, because by the way, you're probably gonna be running, if you're a successful PM at Citadel, $2 billion or $3 billion of gross market value. So you have the benefits of running your own internal hedge fund within a firm that has a large infrastructure to support you. If you're really exceptional at what you do, the monetization behind your ideas will be far greater than what it is at any other firm. And so that recruiting, when we're sitting across from portfolio managers or from analysts who are thinking about how do I grow my career to be a portfolio manager, it's just a different, the scale of ambition is different, and that permeates through everything that we do.
Yeah, good.
You mentioned time, talent, treasure, and in that topic, I wanted to ask you just general life advice, and other than philanthropy, how you've used your talent to build your life's treasure.
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of the question again?
Yeah. So other than philanthropy, just like general life advice of how you use your own talent to build your treasure.
My own talent to build treasure. I will say that one of the highlights, one of the benefits of working for Citadel is I work for the best investment engine in the world. So from the standpoint of kind of ultimately the focus you're saying just locally, like how do you think about building of economic resources? I have access as being a partner at Citadel to invest in our firm, and we have a very strong alignment of interest in terms of the largest investor in the Citadel funds are the principals and employees, and that's where the bulk of my net worth is at.
Hi, good afternoon, Gerald. Thank you for being here. You mentioned earlier in the talk that when you were about 24, 25, you pounded on the desk of Ken Griffin and you said, I am ready for that controllership opportunity. Historically, how do you find the courage to really, I guess, like ask for those opportunities, to really believe in yourself? And when people tell you no, like how do you go about it?
Wow, that's a great question. All right, let me. There's another part of that story that that would give you some insight, maybe into me, and a bit into what I think is actually important in that piece. So when I went into Ken and was kind of behind the the controller of the firm tells us that she's going to be moving to the East Coast, I literally am like the next the next day in Ken's office. Went home, thought about it overnight, like what's my pitch going to be, and I made the pitch as to why he should put me into that seat. Now again, I'm 24, 25 years old, and saying like, look, put the finance infrastructure of the firm in my hands. So that's a big leap in and of itself. But I told him, here are all the things I can't do. I haven't done tax, I haven't managed people, and I forget the third one, but it was a pretty like, if I was sitting the other side of that conversation now, I've got this guy in front of me who's pitching why he should get the job, and he's just giving me the 3 reasons why I should not give him the job. But I think with it was also the pitch I said, like, look, and I promise, I'm committing to you, I am gonna find a way to close each of these gaps in my knowledge and what I have to do from recruiting the right team around me that will help me to be successful in this endeavor. And I had to go out and recruit people who were older than me to be able to kind of come in and fill in the gaps of areas that I didn't know. So it was, I think, having a healthy, like, honesty around where my core skills were. And I've done that, I think, a few times over, as I said, when I became the CFO of the firm in 2003, I wasn't the external face of the firm. I wasn't particularly comfortable getting up to have to do these kind of things. But I was like, okay, if I'm really serious about that, I want this to be my career and I want to be at the time the CFO for one of the largest, most successful investment firms in the world, I have to change. And that's come through my own job today. There's been, the half-life of the skills that, I have in this job, it ticks pretty quickly. And so it's a constant focus in terms of how do I reinvent my skills? What are the things that help that can make me continue to be successful, and the things that can help me continue to be, to contribute to the firm at the level that, fortunately I've been able to continue to do.
Yeah, good.
I feel bad for the people who are in the overflow room. They can't ask questions.
Thank you. So by moving your offices to Miami, how did you solve for the latency issues you may experience in electronic trading by not staying in close proximity to CME?
Well, CME is not the only spot where we trade. I mean, so I think one of the question was in terms of as we moved to Miami, how we think about the latency issues in our business. We're connected to every major exchange around the world. So we've got data centers populated in those, in different countries and different cities. So it's, that largely was something we had thought through. But we did not have a Chicago dependency from that standpoint as we were thinking about the decision.
We're 3 years out from the Wall Street bets phenomenon. Would love to get your perspective into what the conversations were like in Citadel at that time and kind of your reflections 3 years later.
That was an interesting time for sure. And and also someone's like, look, I said earlier to my youngest son, my 3 older kids are now all in college, but 2 of them were in college during that period. Now you get the feedback loop of, hey, Dad, Citadel was on whatever, social media channel of the day is. So that was interesting, like, became, and ultimately, like, a movie comes out of it, and you're on there's this whole kind of, caricature of Wall Street and our firms. I think is, what's the positive side of it? It was a great moment for people who may not have thought about, like, investing, to take that a bit more seriously. Now, would I advise that they should be putting all their, the resources into, like, one stock or in one particular thing? No, but it caused people in a moment, I think some of this has persisted over time, to take a broader interest in markets, which I think is just a healthy thing from ultimately kind of, from that vantage point. So I think there were positives that came from that as well. On the flip side, I'd say candidly, one of the negatives I think is that it also, gets a bit of the power of social media behind the standpoint of perhaps getting some people over their skis in, again, in single asset concentration. It wasn't particularly positive either. But from our own vantage point, you knew it was kind of a moment. We knew in terms of ultimately, like, what the actual, what had happened within the firm, what the truth of it was. And it was largely some noise to deal with on the outside, but not something I'd say that from an investor standpoint, people didn't particularly care about. It wasn't our investors, who are some of the most sophisticated investors in the world. It was nothing we were getting blowback about at all. But definitely interesting to see the number of things were posted about us during that point in time. But it comes with being, look, you have 30 years of history and 30 years of building 2 of the preeminent, investment market making firms in the world. That's to be expected in terms of the standing we have.
Thank you so much. Earlier you talked about kind of how, like, technology has transformed the business. Was curious on how, with the advent of, like, private equity and private credit, how kind of that shift in the funding of companies has kind of shifted the firm's thinking.
Well, it's gonna be interesting because obviously we're in a moment right now where there's a fairly landlocked, given, there's actually not a lot of IPO activity. There's a lot of companies that are looking to get from, unicorn private equity investor status into public markets. So that's clearly something that's going to be resolved here over the course of the coming, year to 2 years. So we're not investing in private equity. We're not a private equity firm, and we've done some private credit over the years, not a business that we're invested in currently. Our business really is at the intersection of liquid markets and liquid strategies. I actually think the best way to describe it is that we're in the moving business, not in the storage business. So that's, it's kind of, you have a thesis on a particular investment, you have a catalyst event for the idea, you monetize it, you move on. That's really kind of the fundamental backbone of what we do. But looking in terms of ultimately, I think it's actually more of an issue of what's going on within the banking system is driving more of the emergence of what's going on within private credit. As an example, is that you just don't have the same robust bank balance sheets, particularly in the back of, Silicon Valley Bank last year, what's going to happen with some of the regionals that have typically been, vectors for getting capital to companies, that you're going to see more private credit step into that void. Yep.
I have a question about, you mentioned staying kind of innovating your career, staying kind of ahead of the, the curve, I guess. How do you go about staying or innovating your career as you go forward? And also, like, as we are all getting near graduating, thinking about your own kids, or, what advice would you give to them as the world continues to evolve, given AI, geopolitical issues? What advice do you have for people like us, your own kids?
So, I guess one of the benefits of, like, much like your parents, your kids don't always listen to the advice you give them. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I told my oldest son not to come back to Chicago. He's going to be starting in Chicago at Ernst & Young in a few months. So, so we'll see. I'm joking. Like, look, I think one of the best, just look at my own views over time, being flexible. So ultimately, in terms of being open to new information, not kind of getting too set in kind of your own ways of how things need to be done, or too rigid in terms of the kind of method of thinking you have. And that comes, I'm fortunate from the standpoint, I work in a business where it's pretty hard to do that, because markets are constantly changing, markets are constantly evolving. You need to be, kind of abreast of kind of fundamental principles that go with that. Other industries are going to have different challenges, and I know this one really well. I won't professors to think, but I think as a general thread, being flexible, adaptable, open to new information, seeking out new information, those are going to be the keys to, and much like that, if you roll the tape back when I was, coming through Booth, everyone was saying that the advent of the internet was an internet in the way that, kind of Google and the firms were emerging at that point in time was going to radically change everyone's jobs. Okay, they changed people's jobs, and it made certain elements of the job you had more efficient, more effective, and you became more productive as a result, and you were able to learn and grow at a faster rate. And it'll be, I think, similar in terms of there are clearly unknowns. You can't forecast those, but having that adaptability will be a key piece to success in terms of moving forward.
Thanks.
As honest as you'd like to be, whether through the lens of your firm or personally, what's your perception of retail investors, however broad you'd like to define that?
I'm going to put words in your mouth. That's got a little bit of a negative connotation to it. Look, I think ultimately in terms of there's, even just my own circle, look, you don't know on the other side what someone's kind of decision processes are behind the click that they make in terms of investing. There's some people, and I think there's a bit pejorative at times, that they think the retail investor can't be as educated in a particular position as perhaps a professional investor. If you're really passionate about a particular stock and you do all the research behind it, and you're like, I think this is going to be an area where I want to make an investment, I don't think there's any reason why you can't be as successful in thinking about that as perhaps what the professional investor is. But and like anything else in life, there's some people, if you don't do the research behind what you're looking to do, there's going to be obviously the potentially the other side that comes with that. I think just unfortunately. So that said, ultimately it's that people can have, particularly in the era that we're in and the free flow of information, the ability to make reasoned investment decisions around either individual stocks or the different things they can do from a passive standpoint in terms of, I have a view on technology, maybe I don't know this company versus that company, but I have a view on the sector. That there's a lot of tools that are available to you in a way that weren't available perhaps 10 years ago, that I think give you a lot of tools that are exceptionally helpful.
Thank you for coming. I actually have a slightly different question. I'm wondering what brought you into operations, because this is not considered the most glamorous part of the business.
Well, so I'm an accountant by background. So that was where my career started. I have a CPA, and that was basically, I was going to be focused in terms of, early career was, I want to be a CPA. I'm going to work in public accounting, because it gives you, the insight into the backbone of really any kind of company and how it operates. That was my original thinking. And then from there, it became, using that in terms of my entry point into Citadel. Like, look, I've been involved in, I was involved in terms of one of the earlier things I did beyond accounting was actually the funding of our balance sheet. And, so the implicit pieces that you learn about asset and liability mix. That's one of the most important parts of like liquidity is the lifeblood of any trading firm. So from that vantage point, it's an opportunity to go learn something like that. So I would say my fundamental interest was in how like the nuts and bolts of how businesses operate broadly. And the benefit of that over, the course of 30 years has been they have a career that's been focused on a lot of different things rather than just in one thing. For some people, that was where their interests lie. I had the benefit of being able to see all facets of our business, on a global basis.
Maybe a simple question, but what keeps you up at night?
Well, we had a couple topics in here already. Probably, I think I'll take that from a broad standpoint. I am pretty concerned about the state of the world right now, just in terms of like where to, the geopolitical issues we have in place. We have a large, we have an election cycle in front of us this year. Those are things that have been, not just from a societal standpoint, but obviously also for our business as well. So those are things we're going to be, acutely focused on over the course of the months to come here. In terms of our business, I get this all the time in terms of like, you're sitting across from investors, like, well, what keeps you up at night? Look, you're always focused in terms of, that you don't want complacency. Like we have firms that had an extraordinary amount of success. How do you make sure that over time, I think back to the earlier question that someone had asked around just thinking about the commitment of that throughout the firm is how do you basically, what are the next set of goals? What are the next 6 things we really want to be focused on? And how do we, how are we going to make sure that there's not just the natural human condition is that if you have a period of prolonged success, you kind of rest in your laurels a bit. And, fortunately, we've been able to kind of keep the firm out of that doldrum over the course of time. And that's really what your, key focus is as a leadership team.
Yeah, good.
Where you?
Yeah, so it's no secret that the rise of multi-manager, multi-strat hedge funds is being talked about in the public discourse about how systemically important they might be to properly functioning financial markets or the broader economy. So my question is kind of twofold. Externally, how has that changed Citadel's interactions with government regulators and government officials? And then internally, how do y'all think about risk in that context?
So there's a lot, I guess I have a little different perspective in the first part of your question. There's a lot of focus today on what they call saying the rise of the multi-strategy manager. But so to the benefit of time, if I roll the tape back 10 or 15 years, you would have had Diamondback or Carlson or a number of firms that basically were the multi-managers at that time, and the orderly transition of capital when those firms had either events or performance or things that founders folded their tent, that capital transitioned to other forms. So that's I think that's just an ordinary course of that happens. There's more focus on this today, given that there's bigger concentrations of talent in those firms. So the Citadels of the world, Millenniums, D.E. Shaws. So from that vantage point, they are the firms that have had extraordinary degrees of success. And so there's a lot of media attention on that piece, and almost inordinately so. And it comes with it the narrative of that there's, thinking about things from a talent standpoint, that all the talent's concentrated in those firms. And like, look, we do have, fortunately, a lot of talent within Citadel, and some of our competitors do as well. There's a lot of talents embedded throughout the industry, holistically, and some people don't want to be part of those firms that are, that will be focused there. But to the root of your question, do I think we're systemically important? No, I think ultimately that we have in our equities business, thousands of positions in a given day. I don't come in thinking about what are the top 10 stocks of the day. We literally have 85 portfolio managers in equities. There's thousands of positions. They're spread around the world. Same thing in terms of think about the risks that we take within commodities or within fixed income. There's, again, you've got thousands in a given business. You have hundreds in a given, in another business. So our business is really made of singles and doubles every day. It's not made of swinging for the fences in a particular trade idea. And that's largely, I think, if you look at most of the firms that are the largest multi-strategy managers, their businesses generally operate in that type of way. I think it's very different than saying you've got someone who's focused in terms of a large scale concentrated bets that they're making. Is the regulatory environment clearly more focused today? Of course it is. And particularly it's because some of the things that come out of Washington are a bit head scratching in terms of what is it they're trying to get accomplished in markets, and often in ways I think are incredibly disruptive or have the potential to be disruptive. So yes, do you have interactions with government regulators? Yes. But if I roll the tape back to 2009, 2010, we were one of the most influential firms in terms of getting the derivative clearing rules instituted during Dodd-Frank. So I think ultimately, as a involved, informed participant in the marketplace, we think it's our obligation to make sure that we are vocal about the pace of regulation.
Okay, maybe we have time for one final question, because I know all of you have class to go to. Okay, go for it.
Thank you for your time. My question is regarding what is your prediction for the future of hedge fund and financial industry in service? in broad?
Sorry, can you repeat your question again?
What is your prediction for the future of hedge fund industry and in financial services in,
What's my prediction?
yeah, like what direction?
We should turn the tape off so I can't be measured on this. I guess that later. Look, I think that ultimately the industry as a whole, so hedge funds as a whole, have had a strong reputation for the prudent management of risk and the delivery of returns for clients over the course of 50+ years. And I think largely in terms of the firms that are most successful in this space are really committed to the idea of bringing together, that back to the backbone of people and infrastructure in the monetization of ideas to commit capital in the highest value ideas on behalf of our clients, and investors writ large. So I think that ultimately, do I think there's a change coming from the industry in a way I think is detrimental to it? No. I think that largely in terms of looking at the industry has generally been pretty self-policing. If you don't perform, people redeem your capital and you kind of make way for the new entrant into the marketplace. So I don't think there's a broad scale disruption coming necessarily to hedge funds in that regard beyond the kind of normal natural course of evolution that happens within the hedge fund industry as a whole. So I still have a pretty bullish outlook for the business holistically.
So I think we're out of time. So Jenny, thank you very much for coming and for answering these questions. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you. Thank you.